Respected members of the faculty, ladies and gentlemen, good day to all of you. I am delighted to be invited to this conference and to speak to all of you about the Indian diaspora in the US that I am indeed part of. The title of my presentation is Indian Diaspora in the USA, Some Personal Perspectives. Let me say a few words about myself. I'm basically a technical researcher in a mathematical area, and I do want to make a big disclaimer. I'm not a social scientist, I'm not an expert on diaspora, so you're not going to see any pedantic theories or citations here. These are purely based on my empirical observations and interactions over many years. I've been a US resident for 48 years. I've been very active in the Indian community in the USA through various organizations like the Carnatic Music Association of North America, the Hindu temples. We have a Tamil drama group that has raised over $250,000 for various charities in India. I also participate to help certain service-oriented NGOs in the US. So whatever I'm speaking about is based on interactions with hundreds of families and people who have come to know, as also my own personal experiences. I'm very actively interested in things Indian, particularly Carnatic music and Vedanta, politics and economics. On the right, you will see three of my publications in these areas. The one on Bhaja Govindam, is a book related to Vedanta. I have a CD of my songs published by a very well-known Carnatic musician. I also have a book titled Innovation by India for India, The Need and the Challenge, which is basically a discussion of why and how India can create a solid environment that is conducive to not only innovation but owning that innovation by Indians in India. The book, I hope, has already had some significant impact, as I see that many ideas discussed there have become part of the new National Education Plan of India. I don't know whether it is because of the book or is a serendipitous result. If you are interested in a free PDF of this book on innovation by India for India, please do shoot me an email and I'll be happy to send you a link from which you can download that. So without wasting any more of the precious time allotted to me on myself, let me get to the topics of this presentation. What I plan to cover are the following. First, I would like to briefly talk about the Asian Indian influx of the 1960s to the USA. I'll give you a portrait of that generation of Indians, their challenges and their accomplishments. I will then get to the change scenario of the 21st century, starting with the infamous Y2K and all that, which really transformed the Asian Indian worker to an Indian American group of leaders. So that kind of gives you a background of the Indian diaspora in the USA. And after doing that, I would like to switch gears a little bit, talk about the benefits to India through the diaspora. I would also like to definitely acknowledge the benefits to the diaspora from the Indian connection. That connection, I very strongly believe, is extremely important, not only to India and to the Indian diaspora, but actually to the two nations and to democracies at large. Having talked about those, I'm going to share some of my own worries for the future about the challenges in continuing that connection with the Indian diaspora. I don't believe only in pointing out problems. You see, like in my book, wherever possible, I would like to at least throw in some ideas so that people have a starting point to think about it. So I will have also a few possible ways through which we could maintain that connection and what different segments have to do to accomplish that. I started by saying that I'm not a diaspora expert, so don't expect any theories or any citations and so on. But let me please make an appeal, okay, to those researchers in this area. I think it's very important that these topics on how to maintain the connections with the diaspora into the future generations, how to leverage them for the benefit of both the diaspora and India, they should form important topics of research. So I hope there are some takeaways for doctoral students or those who are looking for interesting projects in this area to work on. So with that, I would really like to dig into each of these topics individually and make my presentation. As you all would certainly know, the first big wave of Indian immigration to the US started in 60s. Thanks to whatever Britain accomplished with the US government, Indians were prohibited from coming to the US in large numbers, although there was a trickle of them going back even a few centuries ago. I'm not going to cover that history. I'm sure that's very familiar to you. The key point to emphasize is that although there was a big wave in the 60s, that wave was mostly of professionals. And most of the people who came in were doctors, engineers, educators, and people with degrees who were engaged in various professions. Now, I am part of that, okay? I came here in 74. And looking back, one thing I should say is that we had a very low glass ceiling. There was only so far one could advance, irrespective of whatever one contributed, achieved, or had to show. We were seen as foreign and different. We had serious cultural differences, okay? Having been born and brought up in India, those were very evident. For example, in the US, when there is a meeting or so, the more vocal, the one who is first to talk, somehow they give an impression like they are really the go-getters. But for us Indians, we were brought up both at home and in our schools and in other environments in a way that being right was more important than being first. And that kind of made us a little bit disadvantaged in various group settings. Also, see, there is, or there was, I should probably say, at least in my generation, a large amount of self-effaciveness in the people, which prevented them from beating their own trumpet and talking about their successes. In fact, honestly, I'm afraid that some of the first few slides of mine may be considered badly by some of my own friends. That's a reality. So with all that, what we had was a subtle bias against the Asian Indian, which kept him primarily at lower levels of employment. There was also a subconscious bias based on religion, race, color, and all that. Although in an educated environment, in a professional environment that we were in, people were careful not to be explicit about it or to show it. The outward courtesy, however, could not mask that subtle bias 100%. I would be telling a lie if I said anything else. The bias showed itself more in the form of omission than in the form of commission. So when it came to things like awards or promotions, Indians were passed by because they were not really part of the group. Now, to be very honest, I must say that a lot of the responsibility fell on us too. We had our roots in India, we were culturally different, And we were always going back, okay? I mean, you talk to any Indian of my age group in those days, they'll say, oh, I'll be here for a couple of years maybe, and I'll go back. Although it never came to pass. And we were entirely focused on our professional and financial success to the exclusion of everything else. And we had a certain insular attitude, outside of work, mixing mostly with Indians, and living a lifestyle that kind of mimicked what we had in India. And we also came with poor soft skills, okay? See, with the Japanese, they say with the hi of Japanese, the hi really has to be interpreted not only based on the sound, but the intonation, the body language, and a lot of things. That's true with Indians, okay? We are not good at saying please, thank you, and all, but the tone with which we speak, our body language is what helps to convey what we really want to. But unfortunately, to a person from a different culture, these things are misunderstood as people having poor soft skills. Most importantly, we were not plugged into even normal conversational topics, okay, which are mostly related to sports. I said I've been here for over 40 years. I still don't relate to American football or baseball. So I need to assume some responsibility too for the glass ceiling that existed against us. All right. This book, Rise of Indian Americans by Tarun Basu, is a fantastic place to look at our experience in this country. Despite the fact that, I don't know why they chose to include Kamala Harris in the title. Neither the rise of Indians nor Kamala Harris had anything to do with each other. She herself discovered or rediscovered her Indian background, to a very large extent only after she started running for president. Anyway, that aside, whatever the glass ceiling was, the first wave of Indians did achieve much success. And the reason was there was a lot of goodwill they created, particularly the Indian doctors working in very difficult places, educators teaching in many universities and colleges. And they were seen to be highly dependable, hardworking, with some real human values and providing quality work. And then a big change came. The change came with this Y2K bug. Okay, year 2000 came, and thank God somebody forgot that a lot of the software won't work. So that brought in a lot of IT professionals, mainly software guys, but these were highly qualified. Okay, that wave really sucked up some of the brightest people from the best of institutions in India to do mundane programming. These people were extremely underemployed and exploited by middlemen too. So that naturally created a lot of noble discontent among them. And their spirit of innovation found other channels. And one of them that happened was Silicon Valley. And I don't have to tell you, it has created trillions of dollars of wealth to the US, and a substantial chunk of that is due to Indian innovators. Today, what we are seeing is that thanks to all this, Indians do find a seat at the table, and for some, that seat is even at the very head of that table. Now, coming to the second and third generations of the Indian diaspora here, they are born and brought up in the USA. They have less baggage of the cultural differences we suffered from. They have grown up with their American counterparts, and there's a lot of mixing that happens in the classrooms and playgrounds, so much so that they are no longer viewed as foreign, but as Indian American. And the Indian American today has displaced many others and has become the wealthiest ethnic group in the US. That alone tells you the achievement that has taken place. Now, this generation has broken into Ivy League and elite universities through both their performance. The Indians are, after all, a group that emphasize education very much. And more importantly, affordability. The parents, even tightening their belt, decided to send their children to the top universities. So today, they too have a high seated at the high table. Many of them are CEOs and in top positions, and some of them are even high up in the government of the USA. I do expect to see a lot more from this group, and you should too. See, in the meanwhile, India itself has marched on in many different areas: IT, supercomputing, nuclear, space. It's the fifth largest economy. Honestly, India declaring itself to be nuclear made a big difference. The West could no longer ignore India. And more importantly, we today have a more confident, self-assured leadership without the baggage of all those colonial hangovers. To understand where the Indian diaspora in the US fits into all this, let's look at a few things, all right? What are the influence areas for this diaspora? First and foremost, it has changed the optics of India completely, all right? We are no longer considered as a bunch of snake charmers from a poor country, but as brilliant technical people. And along with that, it has enhanced the American view of India, both in the public and in the government. A lot of the improved government relations between India and the US can be attributed to the influence of this diaspora, which is becoming a kind of a vote bank, and in addition is also making significant contributions to the campaign of many American politicians. The technical people in this diaspora have done a significant amount of technology transfer to India. I, for example, during every year, every vacation, I have taken 1 week off to give lectures at various universities in India, primarily to bring them up to date in my field. I'm sure there are many others who do a lot more than what I have done, but this is an example. Foreign direct investment. Quite a bit of investment comes into India from the US through NRIs, both in terms of investment into securities and other things, but also as monetary contributions to members of families and charitable contributions to a number of social causes. So there are many ways in which the Indian diaspora has really worked well for India and in favor of India. And that is something to keep in mind. So what's the importance of the diaspora to India? Let's talk about it a little bit, okay? See, all said and done, the US opinions matter a lot on the international stage. US is a large market for Indian goods. If India has to become a developed nation, it has to export a lot more, and US is one of the large importing countries of the world. Indians may be very innovative, but unfortunately the innovations of Indians mostly serve other nations. This is a sad state of affairs discussed extensively in my book. And India itself has tremendous technology dependence, which can be filled by the US. India also has tremendous defense needs. It's surrounded by neighbors who are unstable, aggressive, non-democratic. There's also considerable foreign meddling in this area. And on the economic front, India is extremely capital starved. It needs a lot more infusion of capital to fully draw the benefits of its people's innovative and other capacities. By the same token, India is also extremely important to the diaspora. See, our dear and near ones are still there. We want to preserve the best of our culture and heritage and pass it on. And we can't do that without a good connection with India. And with all the increasing divisiveness and racism in the US, it's good to have a voice that's powerful from outside, pushing for our own human rights. And above all, India is shining as a good democracy where the poor and the disadvantaged of the past are really brought forward. And that is a good example for us to show. But we do have many challenges. Okay, will this connection continue into the future? The distance and cost. India is far away. It is getting more and more expensive to travel. The American melting pot itself can erase all identities. And there's a lot of India bashing here, okay, day in, day out, by the press, the media, and sometimes even by our own people. If you look at the diaspora, they don't seem to care a little bit about these things, and they're very focused on kind of recreating an India that they left. And in India itself, the view of the NRI is not always congenial to good relationships. Yes, I do understand there is a responsibility on the part of the diaspora to change all this. They need to place greater emphasis on instilling in their children a consciousness of their Indian descent and what it means. They need to stop India bashing. See, there was a very nice columnist called Mr. Desai who once wrote in India Abroad, Indians here need to understand and empathize the historic baggage of India. They need to realize that they didn't cause the problem and they've done little to solve them. So why fret about them? The focus should be more on building institutions and activities that help perpetuate the diasporic ties to India and not to recreate the India that we left. On the part of the government of India, there are many things we can do, and I think Israel should serve as a good example. The Indian government should call out India bashers in a proper way. I should say hats off to Mr. Jaishankar, the foreign minister, who is doing a fantastic job of that. India needs to make it easier to interact with India. We need to lubricate the bureaucratic engines, okay, so that it does not become a hassle to work with India. Indian government and Indian businesses need to invest directly on the diaspora. It's really a big press, when you give a huge donation to a big university in the US. But that's not going to establish the real diasporic connections that India needs. We need to create educational material for the future generations. We need to identify and attract potential leaders among them and organize travel and summer camps for them, and even if necessary with scholarships, so that through them this connection can continue into future generations. We need to create very good documentaries, maybe a Voice of India network that is very modern and backed by very good marketing. There are many things that can be done and should be done. I hope that my appeal to you and through this conference, to the government and to those who care, does make a difference. I want to thank you for your attention. Vielen Dank. Thank you very much.